So let me create a simple project. Then we'll go ahead and include that into one of example what we discussed, like protocol and delegates, that we will include at one point of time in order to be reused. And another, we finally, another task what we have to finally make our students record application as a cloud based one. I mean, you will be given a set of REST based or URLs, set of URLs, so that you will be given the login and other credential, what are all the data you need to send, and how you could maintain the session, and how you can handle the data transfer between them. So you could make the entire application a cloud based one. So these are the tasks we have going ahead. So for that, we'll create a simple example on how we can consume the web service. We create a simple example, service example. So as usual, we've been given a view controller and everything looks as usual thing what we have already seen. So I'm not going to add any control elements because our focus is to see how the web service part could be written. So I'm just going to straight away going to write a couple of things which I can make a web service request. Before that, I'd like to get the URL which I'm trying to process. Maybe I can find it from the Google search, Google Map API geocode, something like that. There are a lot of URLs available for our testing purpose. I'll share the URL. You can use the same for your testing purpose. Because it requires an API, API registration. You would need a Gmail account because it is Google proprietary services. So you can use my API. I'll just anyway I'm going to upload the code that you can use it for your purpose. I hope this can be used. This is address. This is geocoding. Yeah, it looks like we'll just use this URL. So if you call this URL, make a GET request, you would need API key. So once you make it, I also have my API key in my website. JavaScript example. This example I remember used it. This is the API key. If you see that you are getting a JSON response, I'm going to make a request to this URL. I'm going to get this response. I'm going to process this response and display it in my application. That's the task. So I'll just copy the URL, maybe which I'm going to use. I'll just keep it over here. We just have it for our later purpose. Let us create first thing we have to make a URL that is called NSURL. This object has to be initialized. URL with a string. So from the string you are creating an object called NSURL. So this string I'm just going to use it. This is what I'm going to make. Now you need to build NS mutable URL request. Any word you find mutable. In fact, it's an object which can be initialized with the empty objects, and then you can add subsequent key value pairs. Uh, that is true for NS mutable array, because when we create an empty array, then we could add subsequent arrays because it's a mutable object, can be initialized and later values can be added. If you are creating just NS URL request, you would end up creating the full object, and which you would not have any option to add headers, such as whether you are making uh, post requests or whether you are adding any payloads. Those kind of thing you cannot append if you do not use a mutable URL request. If you are using just NS URL request. So this part we have to make a request. NS mutable request. Okay, couple of things. Assuming at one point you don't know which method to be called, because usual convention. So in that case, what you can do, you can refer the document. I usually have this habit. For example, what is that initialization? What is the constructor for this particular class, or this particular Objective C class? So I can go to the header and verify. Okay, this mutable request. So following abstract methods may be possible, and that probably we can use it. Just look for a there are a lot of set get values, a lot of things are there. I think probably yet to see the couple of plus. See, request with the URL. There are various methods are there. Overloaded methods also available. So you can make use of them by reading the header of this specific file. In fact, I'm just going to use the one request with a URL, which I'm going to use in this example. Request with the URL. This is a method overloaded one, because the same method name with the different arguments. So this one I am going to use to initialize my NS mutable URL request. So that, let's see. So make a habit of visiting the document quite often. Request with the URL, and of course we have the URL ready. NS URL request caching policy, and this is looking like it expects some sort of constants here. That also we could identify from the document. NS URL. Okay, so I'm not getting that particular constants, but I can visit to the document and identify that. What all the constants are available. Should be usually on the top. Cache. I'll try with that. So there are plenty of stuffs are there. So NS. NSU protection, NS URL. I'll get it from the document. Best. Yeah, these are all the caching policies. Yeah, so in that I can choose one. NS URL request. use protocol cache policy. So this is the one it is expected. Okay, timeout. We usually give a um, like some 240 seconds for a timeout. For example, due to some reason, your phone or your client in this case could not connect it to the URL, or if the URL is made a request but the response is not arriving. So there are two scenarios are there. We cannot keep the constant connection to the client and server. So if one point you do not get any headers or you do not get any response, the request will get timeout automatically, it will disconnect. So it won't disturb the existing scenario. So that usually a recommended value is 240 seconds. So maybe it's still high in my understanding. 240 seconds typically is going to be 4 minutes. So that's still high. But anyway, that's not going to make a big issue at this point. And since it is mutable, I can add a couple of additional attributes. I'm going to set the HTTP method to get. This example just expects a get. We can even have a post also. If you are sending post, you have to make sure the values being added, the additional payloads being added. Request set value I need to add couple of header information. First thing, I need to tell it is going to be a form submission kind of. So set value say it is content type. So I'm trying to define the content type. That's a constant. This is also a constant. So all you need to follow this one. It is called application. This is a HTTP stuff, so we don't have any control over. So this is a header for making a form submission. URL encoded. So application, it's a form URL encoder. So this particular content type header added. One more header is also needed if at all you have a post method. So maybe that also I leave it. Set value that is called content length. Okay. If you have a HTTP post, so you can have this one, for example, how many number of payloads you are sending. So that particular value, for example, usually this particular information, if you notice that this is, since it is get, the payloads being sent, what are all the payloads? After anything, the question mark comes. So these are all the payloads, in fact. So these are all the payloads being sent. So what you can do and measure its length, and then you can put that. For example, maybe this particular one, say assuming I'm just going to keep in a string. Payload length. That particular payload length you can enter here in a string value. So you can measure that. For example, that has to be formatted. I need to set it as a string value. So ns string, what you can do, ns string with the format. You know that it is not just a concatenation in Objective-C and Swift. You have to format the string however way you want. In fact, you are expecting a integer format, that is the D. You can give this one and convert that into, should be LD, long integers. Yeah. So that you can give it over here. If at all that thing is a post method, but in this example we are not using post method. But if we are using post, you have to use the content length. And finally, one more request also need to be placed. Set HTTP body of your payload. These things you have to set if at all you are using HTTP post. But I am not going to use HTTP post, so that's the reason I am going to comment all the blocks. This is not going to be an HTTP post example. This is going to be a GET example. So this one we are going to use because the URL itself contains the required information. So I am going to comment the unwanted parts. Once I make the URL request, I define the content type, and all I need to just make a call to the required. So now we are going to create one more object called NSURL. NSURLSession. It's not task, in fact. Make a initialize NSURLSession so that you are going to make a call to the remote URL NSURLSession. Get access to the shared session because your phone will be having the internet already, access to the internet already. So you are going to get a instance of the active internet, and you are going to place a HTTP request using that session. So we have just initialized the session and create one more object, NSURL. I mean, we have to make the task. So URL session task. Once this one, we'll have to see what is the constructor for that so that we can initialize it. Previously we were using NSURL connection, that is deprecated from iOS 9 onwards. So this is the newest one and it's been recommended. Shared session with configuration if at all there. So void finish. I'm just looking for data task with request, some sort of thing. It's there because it has a block method. So this is the one I'm trying to use. So that can be from the session data task with the request. There are two things are there. One, which one is required, we'll see. Completion data URL response. So this is the second one. The URL request we already have, which is called request. The completion handler, actually it is expecting 3 arguments in my understanding. It's not showing here. One is the response data which is going to arrive, and another one is nullable, or if the response, what is the response header. This is the actual data. This is the header of your response, maybe page not found 404 or 200 something. So this kind of information it will carry. And I expect there is one more overload method available, but anyway, so let us create a block method. So a block method usually starts with a caret symbol and follows as typical what you call the function conventions. So ns data and ns url response. My understanding there is one more object, ns error also can be added if anything goes wrong. Okay, this is a block method and complete your session. So using the session, you are going to make a task and you are sending the request, and you have a block method. Whenever a response with the data arrives, this particular block method will be executed. So this particular task has to be called as a receive. This is the one will initialize your session task, otherwise the session won't be called if you do not call this line. So this session task has to be called in order to make the request using NSURLSession. So the URL will make a request. This request parameter we have already defined which URL is going to call, and we have already kept the URL ready for us, and we have the URL session initialized from the shared connection. Once a connection is established, you are trying to make a request to that from the session, and you are telling, okay, this is the request, and when the response arrives, please use this particular block method to hand over the response. This particular part makes it asynchronous. Means a block method typically processes the request somewhere in a different thread, and when the result arrived, it informs to the current or foreground thread, whatever it is. So in this case, this entire part becomes asynchronous, because assuming if I put a ns log output here, I've written everything in a view did load. So as soon as the view is ready, I'm going to put one more ns log here. I have two ns log. According to the code, this ns log, if you are going in a sequential, assuming there is no block method, so according to the code execution, the line by line execution usually happens. So most of the developer assume, okay, this is the one would be first printed, and then this one would be printed in the console. But scenario would be, you will see this one first printed, and then after some time this is being printed. Because of the reason, the processing time taken for the request and while it waits for the response has to be counted. So the response will arrive at any point of time depending on your internet connection, depending on your firewall setup, depending on your 2G, 3G, whatever setup. So this particular line, I am not sure when it will be called, because it is there under a block method, because it is going to be processed and it has a time constraint attached to it. But whereas this one, it will keep executing, and the moment it will execute, and then it will execute this line, and finally it will execute this line. So you would see in a programmatical point of view, this line first called, and after some time this particular line being called. So that's a point of a block method. So a block method typically or a block. In fact, the handlers usually, so it expects a block method, mean you are processing that particular request in a different thread rather than the foreground. So the foreground mean where your UI is visible, and that request being processed separately. When the result arrives, it is being handed over to the foreground again. So typically it won't disturb your program execution. Your program will be still ready. You can put a loader, you can do some sort of animation until the result arrives, and then once the result arrived, you can display wherever you want. So that's an idea. Something for our understanding. So let us handle the response first. First thing, we have to identify the particular response is coming without any error. This is slightly tricky. First thing, I need to build a NSHTTP URL response. So the URL response is actually just a URL response. It is not a HTTP type. So I need to help it to typecast it NS HTTP response URL response. I'm just typecasting it, and then you can put a if response status code equal to 200, mean it has a valid result or a valid response. You can do a Wikipedia, you can Google it, what are all the HTTP response codes. 200, 404, 404 mean page could not be found, those kind of response codes. So based on the response code, you can handle the result. So you can handle the event if at all required. So if you are getting the response code 200, you can expect the NS data with a valid. So NS data, this is the data what your server is giving to you. So that NS data is a kind of a byte type. You have to process it, and in order to be used as a required data format. I mean, it could be an image, it could be a JSON data type, it could be an XML, it could be anything. I really don't know, because the server is sending the data. I've just captured the byte information, and you need to help the iOS or Objective-C or Swift to identify what kind of data it is sending. In fact, I'm expecting a JSON response. So what I can do, I'm expecting actually the JSON response, I need to convert it as a dictionary in this dictionary. So response something dictionary. We have already a helper NS JSON serialization. So that one, using that JSON object with the data, that data is already available as a what you call from the block method as an argument. And option should be a mutable container so that it can be NS JSON reading mutable container, so that I can read it and process the response and append it to my NS dictionary. And finally, error handler. I need error handler we have already used in some example in the core data. Yeah, so the error handler by default may be pointing to one pointer, at this case null, and I may need it as a pointer to a different one if at all the error is coming. The ampersand symbol we are, the ampersand points to a, so sending pointer to another pointer, mean if the response received, and if it is a JSON data type, you will successfully get a NS dictionary. No problem, that time the error value would be still nil. But the incoming data is not type of a JSON. you get a valid response, but the incoming data is not type of JSON, then you will have a error pointing to a actual error which happened while processing your data. So if the JSON serialization fails, you will have the error pointing to a actual error information. Otherwise, it will be still null or nil according to Objective-C and Swift. So at one point, I should have an NS dictionary for me. Trying to check that whether I am getting it or not. Just going to put NS log response station 1. Okay, I'm highly depending on the NS log to test whether my code is reaching to this point or not. But this is not an actual way of debugging your code, but this is one of the widely used way of debugging whether the particular line of code is being executed or not. I'll also introduce some other way to do that. So before that, we'll have to test whether these things are working or not. So first we start with the NS URL. We decided it is going to be an URL from the string. We build the NS URL object, and then we make an NS mutable URL request with following information of your cache policy and of course the URL information, timeout and everything. And define your what kind of method you're going to HTTP method you're going to call. Because it's a mutable, I can add additional attributes. Of course, I'm adding it here, and get, and defining it is going to be a form submission kind of thing. So content type has been defined. It's a constant. Make sure you remember it. And if it is a post, you have to use the payload length, and that has to be attached as a body to your request. But since we are not going to use this one, we are leaving that. And then initiate NSURL session. A session means you're trying to get active internet connection of your device. So that is shared. So you are getting access. So you're also getting access to that existing internet or network connectivity. And then using the session, you are making a task using the request and various information such as block method to handle it asynchronously. So typically when the connection is being made, you will be given an object called session task. That object has to be initialized in order to be processed this particular task in a different thread. So that handles, and you will get a HTTP response, and make sure you get a valid response once the response is arrived, and process it. So at this point you should be aware of what kind of data type it is. So that in this example, because the URL we have already tested, we are getting a JSON type. So this URL is going to be a JSON, response. URL is going to give me a JSON response, so that you serialize them or pass the JSON data and create an NS dictionary. So just one line, the entire object gets converted to an NS dictionary so that we can process it for a further requirement. So this is what we have done. Let me run this example. I should have active internet to my computer. Okay, I think it has run. We see that the log has actually typed all the information, in fact what you will be getting here. So it has successfully made a connection, or it successfully made a request, and it has got the response. So all you need to use it and display wherever you want in your application. That's one way. So maybe we will add a one label. You can display that. Some information I'm just typing. Okay, so I have to reset to suggest constraint. Constraints added, and initialize that label. wrong place I pressed. Header. Initialize this label. Location info, whatever. So once we initialize that, we can point it, we can display them. So actually we have a habit of synthesizing it. Synthesize. So by default it will be displaying please wait loading something. Once the result arrives, okay, what we really want to display that. You see the NS log also has worked. The will be called first because this one has printed first and the block was called later point of time. So before that, what I really want to display, maybe I want to display the formatted address. So if you read the response, it has an object called results and one of an object called formatted address, which is giving me a string value. So this is the one I would like to print. Location info set text response dictionary object for a key. I think it is going to have a more number of objects, or it's only one object. Okay, it's not actually. I need to get into a results. Results give me an NS array. NS array is actually having. If you see that the JSON response, first it's a object. The object result is giving me an array. Usually JSON notation, the square boxes are considered array. So after the array contains various objects. In that, one of object is actually formatted address. So I need to be a little careful on processing this. First thing I cannot directly point it. First I will be getting NS array. So response dictionary object for a key. Results. Okay. We'll put a for loop and see what we are going to get. So okay, we have an array. We'll test what exactly the contents of the array, if I can get it. So this log I'm not going to need. I'm just going to get what are all the contents of this array. So just check it is, make sure there is no typos. Okay. Still a lot more because it has a lot of objects, but at least we have gone inside the address components, and so it gives me an object. In that I have one more information. So what I am going to do, instead of doing in this way, I do one thing. NS dictionary, make a result object, result array, object at index 0. The very first object we'll capture, that only we'll process, and then that particular object, the NS dictionary, is going to have a formatted address. So okay. So if I get this one, I'm just going to comment this one. So I'm just going to check what is the formatted address alone in this JSON response. Okay, this is what we get. The location is 1600. So this particular thing pointing to Google headquarters looks like Mountain View, California. Okay, so we processed that particular object because I'm seeing how the JSON being created in this way, because it looks like I'm getting a JSON object, and that object is going to have an array if I call the result attribute, and that array contains various instances. So the very first instance of my array I just got, and I am getting one more object. That object is actually containing a key, an attribute name called formatted address. I picked it up. You will have to see the particular response properly, then only you can identify the exact result. So, and that's actually going to be little tedious according to the further example what we are going to see. But once you get used to it, it will be pretty easy. So I'm just going to point setting the text. Check for key. So that I am going to display in my label. So let's see. Please wait. It's not changing. Did I synthesize? Okay, there is not string. Something went wrong. Okay, we'll identify what exactly gone. Okay, it has come anyway. Because of the reason that size was not fitting, so probably I would have given the label was slightly bigger. So the value is being printed. So once the results being, a result arrived from the web service. So this kind of example we are going to do quite often. And there are easiest way to debug your application as well. See, for this example, I've used the NSLog pretty much like to identify whether the results are coming or not, but that's not an actual way of processing them. Instead, you can attach a breakpoints, see what is the value it contains, and you can see whether the application's actually executing this line. So once you just in the particular bar, if you see that if there is a transparent bar available, you can put as many as breakpoints so that the code will wait for the particular results being executed. So let us test it. Now we added a couple of breakpoints. You may expect the application breaking for a while. Now the application has broken because it is stopping. Okay, this particular line being executed. Now the breakpoint is pointing to this one. It means the code has reached this level. If you see the thread, some sort of breakpoint has been added. And if you see that at one point of time, the response dictionary is containing a nil value, no values are there. Okay. Next, I'm going to continue my code. There is a kind of play kind of button. So just continue, and the code reaches to this line. If you see that NS array is containing some sort of informations, and the further line I'm going to reach. If you see that the value result array now contains one particular object, you see that all the informations are there. Formatted address which you are trying to process, address components. You just need to hover around and you will get the what is the value it is having. We don't need to type NSLog quite often. Just introduce the breakpoint wherever possible and see whether the code is reaching to that location on what is the value of such objects being generated, whether the actual values are arriving or not. You can identify here itself, then you can debug your code wherever needed. So, okay, so I'm expecting some results. Okay, the result array contains some values and then I can use it. Hover around, otherwise in the bottom also you will have the information. So here also you can see that what are all the objects the result array contains. See the formatted address, whatever the objects. See, formatted address being a string and address component has additional object because it has some NS dictionary inside, one more, and what are the key value pairs, and that usually contains there are various information. So you can get an overall picture of the object currently holding what is a value or what currently it is pointing to. So using this breakpoint, you can easily debug your application in Xcode. Xcode is one of the, neatest, I've seen Xcode having a various debugging tool, and this is one being quite excellent and just work out of the box. So when you're done, see, remember the code will wait at one point of time. The code execution has been halted. Now finally hit, then you're done. All your breakpoints executed and your value is being, so your code is running as expected. The code is breaking for obvious reason because the view does not have a space, but anyway it still works. Okay. Once you are done, you really don't want to maintain the breakpoints. You can right click it, delete the breakpoint, otherwise you can simply click, hold it and drag it to delete. So once you are done with the breakpoints, remove them. So I would recommend use this kind of way to debug your code as much as possible rather than depending on NSLog much. Okay, NSLog still to see what is actually coming from a console, but it is highly limited to a scope like a string, number, something, because the rest of the classes, if a different object is coming, since it is dictionary I can read it, but if it is some different object I may not be able to read it, because we may create custom classes. The custom class object, what is the value it is holding, I may not be knowing. So using the breakpoint mechanism, and you can halt the code at that particular point and see what is the values it is currently getting. Also, the breakpoints helps us to identify where the particular code is executing. Sometimes when you write a function, you don't know whether the function is called or not. So in that case, put a breakpoint. Okay, if the particular function is called, this particular code is going to halt at that point. If that particular code is not reachable, your code won't call that breakpoint, and you can identify that as a dead end or that particular code is not being called at all. So I think NetBeans and Eclipse also contain similar way of debugging and maintaining the seeing that what is the object it is containing. So it's a similar way, but Xcode is pretty fast and very easy to identify the values of the particular objects where it is halting the code. So this is a simple example of web service. So it requires a clear-cut understanding about the response data which is coming, and you have to read the response, and based on that you need to iterate, because every time a different response may come. I cannot expect every time I will be getting a kind of in that dictionary I will be getting an array, and that first element is going to be containing the format. I'm not sure. It depends on the result what you are getting. Based on that only you need to iterate and identify the data. Okay, so not take it this as a standard, but this is applicable for this particular response. So I'll be also giving you some other way to use some sort of debuggers to check whether what is the HTTP response is coming. Based on the payload information, based on the response information, you can build your NS dictionary and iterate the results and display in your application wherever required. So going ahead, I have to add this code. First point, I need to build a couple of URL, because this example I have used the Google's URL, which is globally available. Next, I am going to give you a set of REST URLs, which I'll be giving you a document as well. I will tell, okay, to register, you have to send so and so payloads, and you will get the response as a success once the registration goes successful, or failed if the registration goes failed. So based on the response, you need to handle the event and take the user to the next screen or stop the screen. The same student app application, we are going to make it as a cloud-based one. So we will do all sort of way of incorporating this, web service part into that example. In that case, I'll be having multiple URLs. Remember, this example I call only one URL. I may have tens of hundreds of URL to be called. So every time I cannot write this code and write a block method every line, or every URL I cannot write this one. We have to create a separate class so that we can reuse it wherever required. That time we will incorporate the protocols and delegates, which we have already discussed in the previous example, and put this URL request and the session information in the particular class. So whenever the response arrived, the delegate will inform to the class wherever it is being implemented. So that's a kind of a best used practice. So that part also I would like to take it forward. So going ahead is going to be little technical, too much of technical information. So I would want you to complete whatever pending task you have in the afternoon session, and of course you still have time for your preparation till 4 o'clock. Make sure you work on your whatever assessment, whatever your previous hands-on things are pending, and after 4 o'clock you guys can concentrate on your assessment topic, whatever it is. Okay, so that you can do it in the afternoon.